Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another art stream with myself, Ferro, and my co-hosts, Alexander Adams and Panama Hat. And tonight we are joined by the wonderful Saffron.
Hello, good evening.
Diversity is our strength, comrades.
Oh, yes.
I love the nation of Israel.
Saffron, you need to have do you have a slogan of your own?
No, I'd have to think about that one. I'll come back to you.
She's cozy posting forever or something.
Yes, yeah. Cozy posting friend.
Hello, friend.
Yeah, hello, friend.
Brilliant.
Chib and Wafer.
Now, Saffron, obviously you've been immortalised by Alex. Now, I don't know if you saw that picture by him.
Oh yeah, that was very cool. Yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
So that's cool. You will live on for all eternity.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you. That's very sweet.
Yeah, no, that was really, really cool. I've watched some of your guys' streams. Very interesting. I haven't seen the Darkness stream. Is it? It's like a
the Art of Darkness. Yes.
Yeah, that one seems cool. I will catch up on that one soon.
Yes, I'm amazed we haven't got a strike. We didn't get banned. It was a pretty good result. So that was the main thing.
It's because we have nothing to lose but our chains, comrades. We're so progressive.
We do front load the streams, so to avoid the censors. That's the key.
We're very clever.
Yep. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking. I called it the absolute state of art, and I had to put the subversive artistic figure of Tristram at the on the front. Especially after Alex did his quite wonderful post where he went incognito, undercover, which is a great story. I mean, I presume it's just you managed to source a Zoom link from someone, or do you not? Can you not give your contacts away?
Okay, so basically, the long and short of it is that I published an article in Bournebrook magazine. So if you go to Bournebrook magazine, whatever that link is, online, you'll find an article on Tristan Hunt, who is the director of the V&A and also a former Labour politician, MP. Yes, and the reason, he was giving a talk at a subject Saffron knows well, the decolonisation of museums. Lol, indeed, and this was hosted by Colchester and Ipswich Museum Services.
Wonderful.
And as they were trying not to be the country bumpkins, so they want to be as progressive and as radical as possible. So they invited on two black historians who very much dislike everything traditional about Britain, and then they also asked on Tristan Hunt, and I can't see any connection there at all. And so basically, I'm on the it's amazing, but I'm on the press lists, on the emailing lists of all these progressive museums, the sort of press offices. So I get these emails every day saying, "Isn't it wonderful that we're decolonising this museum?" And here's the links to our seminars and whatever. And they don't realise that there could be anyone out there in the world that might possibly have a negative response to what they're doing.
Far right is listening.
Well, I like to see myself as the watchman of tradition. Let's just say
the brinkman.
So they sent you this link, and I was one of 40 people who was watching this presentation, in which Tristan Hunt basically said, "Yeah, I'm for decolonisation, but it's got to be done through Parliament and stuff." Anyway, so that's the story.
I just love how Alexander is a truly subversive figure here, sneaking through the back door. He's writing letters. He's getting people fired. He's a one-man army.
I think they know what they do is they leave the front door open and they let anyone wander in, because it just doesn't factor into their brains that there could be anyone opposed to what they're doing.
More of the same. So again, if you are in that sphere, we need you. I'll draw a propaganda poster up to infiltrate and to report back.
Yeah. By the way. Yeah, sorry. And by the way, if you do know of any of these events, do feel free to send me a DM on Twitter, because it's always great content for me.
we should have done this. You should have recorded it, and we could have live streamed it back and talked over the top just for the laughs. Anyway, but that's why I put Tristram on the front, because of...
like a miserable cultural version of EFAP.
Yes, exactly. That'd be great. Okay, so what I wanted to do is to start off tonight with the post that got the kind of conversation rolling. Let me just share my screen a second. And okay, it's not coming up. Do you want to fill the space, Alex, while I get this working?
Yeah, basically there was this post that Ferro did on Twitter, just quoting something, and we'll get up the text in a minute, but basically asking, is there a problem with the right wing and art? Why don't they seem to be producing much? I think one of the reasons why they don't seem to be producing much is they don't get the opportunities and they don't get the funding, and they're being completely blocked by institutions. And I would say, like you go to the Tate Gallery and you try and find some contemporary traditional painting there, and you just you'd be wasting a long time.
So can you guys see this?
Yeah,
perfect. So this is from Lomez. Anton is absolutely right about the absence of right-wing culture networks and why the left is so thoroughly dominates the arts. Let's see if this works here. Can you see this as well?
Yeah.
I'm going to read it out as well, just to be annoying. So, Mark, don't you find the right's inability to produce good art a little strange, given that some might say art in itself is inherently right-wing? Michael, people have made that point before. It's strange. Some of it may simply be the patronage or the pay structure inherent of our time. That is to say, if you want to make it as a novelist or a screenwriter, or just to make movies, you have to go through the established systems, and then you're basically locked out. This is partly a failure of the conservative donor class. They're only interested in short-term electoral and policy victories. Nobody on the right would invest to support the writing of somebody over the course of a decade as he publishes short stories and builds a reputation, which may lead to a breakthrough down the line or not. The right wing would immediately say that's a waste of money. Conservative donors need to think more like venture capitalists. Venture capitalists invest all kind of things that never go anywhere, but they're looking for those unicorns, and you never know who that unicorn might be. If conservatives invest in 100 young writers or artists, maybe one of them ever really hits it big, but that jackpot could be so big that it's truly transformative for the culture. But they don't think that way. They just absolutely don't. They want something very concrete that they can put in a report to say, we've got this bill passed or this thing defeated, and they want it in 6 months. It's a huge failure on our side. And my initial reaction to this was not necessarily disagreeing with some of the analysis, but specifically with his kind of viewpoint on how to fix the situation. But I thought we could just start off by just doing a quick roundtable. What does everyone think about the kind of points? Do we all believe that the left thoroughly dominates the arts? Is the donor class, is it a patronage thing? Like, what's your thoughts on the text? So should we kick off with Saffron? Do you want to give us your thoughts on this little passage? And
yeah, sure. I do think that culturally we are stuck in terms of the arts, in producing new things and being creative. But I certainly do agree that the arts institutionally are dominated by leftism and postmodernism. So I'm just trying to get the rest of the text up. But yeah, I pretty much do agree with that. I'm not really sure about the funding aspect in terms of private funders, but I guess maybe it's just because we're not really creating anything that's like getting the attention. I mean, if you look at like Peter Thiel, who does invest in technological aspects of the right wing and things like that, we don't really seem to attract that attention. But I don't necessarily think that's an ideological thing or necessarily because the left wing dominate it. I just think it's because culturally we are quite stuck.
Are you basically saying that, asking for your teal bucks for your stickers? Yeah,
that's totally what I'm doing. You're listening now.
Just imagine if Teal came in as a big investor for frog stickers.
Yeah, totally. That would be cool.
Yeah. Okay, nice. Panama.
I think it's less to do with, because there seems to be an implication here that if right wingers simply began to produce art like the left does, that it would sort of like balance out. The trouble is, of course, that really it's more of a political power game at play. It seems to me, like it isn't just a lack of investment so much as there's a kind of clamp on certain things, and the abilities not only of certain people to have their art publicized, but of people to the people that amass wealth in the first place. It's not in their interest to promote, art that is focused on what we would consider to be right wing or trad values. Even if they personally like it, the self-interest simply isn't there. Because simply the way the system is built currently drives towards pause at all times, I think. So I understand what is being said here, and I'm not saying it's wrong per se, but I would basically say that, well, that's a part of it. But even if a load of very talented young right wing or reactionary people came out of the woodwork and began to make art and paint and write and etc., it may simply end up being sort of held down and kind of snuffed out, or kept on a very short leash in terms of funding and that sort of thing.
Interesting, especially around this idea of like it being a threat to the system and being snuffed out. Although I can't think of an exact precedent to that. I don't know if anyone can think of an example where maybe Pound, would you say? I mean, he was relatively vilified, wasn't he?
Well, I think he's kind of a unique case in that he was the foremost poet of America, who then ended up on the quote wrong side of an American war. It's not that he was explicitly right. He didn't gain fame as an explicitly right wing poet, of course. He gained fame as a talented poet and a kind of literary impresario. And then, of course, that happened. But I think again the trouble is in the modern day, the types of people that are writing poetry are not the types of people that read poetry or read what I would consider to be authentic poetry, because it simply is beyond them. Poetry in the modern day has been reduced to the personal grievance lists of university academics, essentially. And ironically enough, this is a topic for another day, perhaps, but I do think that Ezra Pound and the modernists have a part to play in that, actually, that they did kind of academicize the poetic arts to an absurd level. Hence why nowadays the only people that read and write the stuff are people that work in universities, and we all know what those types of people are like. So the like some like young genuine scholar of certain types of poetry not only would have to compete against that and compete against a system that clamps them out, they would have to basically invent an entire school of poetry by themselves, because they can't do contemporary poetry, because it's been so completely deracinated down to nothing that it basically isn't poetry anymore. They can't simply do like a pastiche of early 1900s romantic sort of poetry, because you're just copying a random point in time. It would be like a painter just returning to like late 1800s academic style just to be trad. It doesn't, you're not being artistically authentic if you do that. So again, as I say, the burden is as well on them, not just to write poetry, but to come up with an entirely new way of writing it. So there's an awful lot of weight pressing down on any aspiring young trad poets, essentially.
Okay, a couple of interesting points there. Alex, what's your thoughts on the matter?
Well, I think that what we've got a problem is that we don't even know what the situation is. We can't really assess things because the whole public funding model is so skewed that we can't get any idea of what we would call right-wingers or traditionalists are out there, because we simply don't encounter them. They're just, they're not, aside from maybe a few of the older sort of societies, like the Society of Pastoralists or the Royal Society of Watercolorists or so on. Apart from those sort of traditionalist craft-centered or medium-centered or media-centered organizations, there's no way of knowing what traditional art is going on, because it's all so local and it's all so small scale that you just can't get like a sort of 10,000 foot view. And the reason for that is that the left totally dominates the donor class, the public arts, universities, art schools. The church isn't commissioning much art. It's in pretty bad state. I mean, both churches, the two main ones. Critically speaking, it's very difficult to get stuff published on traditional art, either in the art press or in publishing houses. So it's very difficult to actually understand what's going on. So you can't, you can't know what's going on. B, you can't make any sort of assessment. And C, you can't make any recommendations without this information, other than to say, well, we've just got to get more traditional stuff open. We've got to have more traditional schools. We've got to have like apprenticeships and so forth. But I would say just one thing else. Creators will follow. They will follow the money. So if you say, the reason so many artists are woke and left wing and doing avant-garde stuff is because that there's money in it, because there's public provision of money for this, and there's academic support for it. They're like, you can get a job teaching if you're doing conceptual sculpture. If you're not supported by a university and you're not supported by a public arts system, then there's no market for conceptual art. It disappears completely. So either they disappear and they go off and do something else, or they transfer and they actually become traditional artists and they start doing the sort of art that you appreciate, if they're capable of it. I don't know. So my thinking is, if you get someone to lead and you get the right incentives, and that includes status and money, then I think a lot of people will switch over. A lot of creators will switch over.
Yeah, I think for me, there's a lot of interesting points in there, which kind of aligns with my thinking. I think the first thing around networks, and actually this top line is really true. The absence of right-wing culture networks, and I think when you're talking about the kind of total control of culture at the educational and the kind of curated level, part of that is, yes, that as a percentage, there's probably going to be less, quote unquote right wing people who are creating at this, but also, like you said, I think those people do exist because I think when we think about artists, I think we think too much of this idea as to people that have gone through an academic system. There's this form of credentialism to it, where it's kind of like an artist is only someone who is formally trained through university or whatever. But again, from my philosophical perspective, you have these creative people, people with imagination, etc., that will naturally move to these points no matter what. So do you see what I'm saying? I think, yes, the education has been taken over, but at the same time, maybe that's meant that there's a generation of right-wing people that haven't gone to art school, for example. But I wonder whether, in the long run, people will sort of keep naturally gravitate towards creative things. And I was gonna ask Saffron. I'm gonna put you in the hot seat here. You're someone that's obviously you you run your own business, but you kind of do your own little art pieces as well. I'd say you're quite a creative person. Did you like? Did you like? I don't want to ask what your degree was, but was it in like a creative and a cultural thing? And were you put off at school from going down that route?
So my degree was in history. I wasn't necessarily encouraged by school to have any creative endeavors or traditional crafts like knitting and crochet and sewing. That was more of just something that I felt was missing, that I wanted to do with my time, and was influenced by various friends. But can you say the question again? Sorry, Farrell.
So I guess the question is, you obviously are a creative person, and you've got that inside of you. You have if I want to be cheesy about it, an artistic soul. Do you feel like you were put off by the education system to take down a more like sensible degree in history, or was it just that you're kind of?
Okay. Well, for me, at that time when I took my undergraduate, I wasn't necessarily interested in those things. It's only been after my undergraduate that I decided to take on those things. But I mean, in terms of my master's degree that I study now, if I was studying in the arts, I think I probably would have quit straight away. And a lot of my friends who do study arts, a lot of them who aren't necessarily right-wing, they're maybe just centrists. It does seem to be that they do experience more of like not necessarily taught about anything that's useful. It's all about sort of like love bombing, and not actually exploring any creativity.
Like I can sort of see it through. I have a younger sister who's at he's doing a fine art degree, and it's interesting to kind of hear the courses and the projects that she's doing, because she does do technical pieces, etc. But there is a lot of this kind of like, I guess, kind of propagandic style art or whatever. You're meant to kind of make a big impression about a current affair or whatever. And so it's interesting. Her actual skill level hasn't increased at all. She doesn't draw better. She doesn't sculpt better. She maybe has done a couple of other mediums, but like you said, there's a lot of love bombing, a lot of kind of listening to what everyone has to say about.
Yeah, there's like no critic. There's a lot of the comments that I've heard from friends as well. It's quite interesting. Is there's no room to be critical about other people's artworks. It's always sort of it's very always everybody's the same, and you can't sort of like pick out like really smart people or really creative people. It's really weird.
Yeah, because again, I think when you analyze the situation, it on the face of it, it looks like that everything's lost. They've got control of everything, but at the same time, the left has created a system where they have no way of identifying what good art is, or putting the right people in the right positions. And so, this chap's right. There is more left art being produced than ever before, but are they really even bringing their best to the table? That's what's interesting for me. There's a lot of stuff being produced, but is it going to last the test of time? And are they really connecting with the best people that the left has?
Well, I would say long term, it's not going to last, because if you look at the canon, you see the canon just weeds out all the weak stuff. But the point is that we don't have 100 years, at least personally, we don't have 100 years each to see this through and sort of finally rise to our level of ability. You're going to have like generations and generations of people just not either not being recognized or not going into art at all, because they understand that there is just no future for them unless they're playing conceptual games or they're doing that sort of stuff. So long term, yes, it will shake out, but short term, medium term, what are we talking about? People's careers, people's livelihoods, all of that is all dependent on getting some sort of funding now. And I know that I noticed that Lambda said something pretty good. I'll just go back up to it. He said commissioning art would be much better use of right-wing money than funding political stuff. So, I mean, he basically agrees that, the people who are right-wing leaning or anti-progressive would do very well to put their money into the arts rather than necessarily, funneling millions into, backing this or that candidate, especially if they're milquetoast, especially if they're Republicans or Conservative Party,
I just want to go back to this network point again, and I think one of the most powerful things that university has, again, is not the training, but it is that network, that connection of people. In terms of like who gets selected to go, like say for example, you've got like a year's worth of art students, like a certain percentage of those guys are going to get picked up and lionized or whatever. That is
very, very few of them. And then you're also, I said, basically you're going to get maybe 5% of any cohort. And then you're going to get another 10% who are going to be sort of like jobbing artists. And then the rest are going to go into teaching. And you're going to get perhaps the majority who are going to drop art completely, except as a hobby.
Okay. But I guess my point is like, how do those people get selected? And it is, from how I see it, it is this kind of network effect. It's like you, like one of your friends was an artist, but then they changed degree to become a curator, and that gave them the first break or whatever. Do you see what I'm saying? And I think what's interesting is that the right doesn't have that network in a formal way. And actually, I think it's that for me, the power of an art degree isn't actually the training or the ability to make people better artists. It's just purely that network effect. But is that not something that we create ourselves, or to build up? What's everyone's thoughts on networks? Panama, I'm going to throw you back in here.
I think networks are vitally important to almost to the kind of highest level of what we can do at the current time. I think that, again, as you say, it's a real source of power, even to people like us who are relatively powerless in the grand scheme of things. We're not the Blair Institute, but ultimately, like all these things are networks of powerful people. Or if you want to take it even further, all these things are networks. So I mean, yes, I think these are important, and at the same time, they give us the opportunity to kind of organize our talent when it comes. We can, every T.S. Eliot needs his Ezra Pound, to use a poetic analogy. You're not going to be able to. It doesn't matter how groundbreaking of an artist you are, or even just if you're a good maker of content, I suppose, without even going into pure art. You may always need that leg up. You may need somebody who's already got some influence in certain communities to say, yeah, this guy needs a green light, let's push him forward. I mean, my own lucky start in the world of poetry was thanks to a network with one particularly based older woman who funded the publication of a book. It's these are the, as you say, these are the reasons why networks are so powerful, because they can they're kind of the movers of the resource of talent, if you will, I think. Absolutely.
And that's how some of my books were published, was because there were a couple of people who were really supportive, and not for political reasons. They just backed me because they liked my stuff and they thought it was worthwhile. Then they knew that I wasn't going to be getting any funding from public arts.
Do we think that there is any chance of new formal networks like universities created specifically for right-wing people, or is that the best? Is the kind of university the kind of epitome of young artists and creators meeting together?
I would step in at this point and argue that the university, kind of recreating a parallel university system, is not within our purview nor our interests. Rather, what we should do is open sort of like guild schools, in a sense, if we're gonna do anything like that. For example, like one school that teaches, like who was that fellow? Was it Edward Slingsby at the event? He was talking about traditional
architecture. Yes.
Architecture. Like for example, what if it was somebody like him, who was like the last person in the country teaching how to build, to construct things in that way, or to draw in that way? Like sort of. I think we should aim to set up institutions catered for specific things that aren't just like an attempt to build a university. That seems more within our ability and more practical to our users, I think, because, for example, if you had this one place that taught traditional architecture or one academy that taught traditional art, you would have a base of paying clientele outside of just the political right. It would attract people that were interested and who want to learn these things, who don't really care about politics, or who may even be in some way opposed to them. They just care about the art or the skill or the knowledge or whatever it is they want to learn there. So that would work in our favor again, even on a practical level, just in terms of funding and outreach, and not doesn't even have to be related to influence, but of course that would also be enormously important.
Just on this kind of network and guilds, there is almost in my mind like an unofficial sort of decentralized learning network in the craft space, and I want to pull in Saffron for this, specifically around knitting, because obviously there's tons of forum YouTubers, etc. Like, how would you describe the scene in terms of learning? Because I guess no one goes to knitting school, do they? So,
you kind of. Sorry. What did you say?
I just say how do knitters get it? Like, obviously they kind of like see it, but then how do they start to learn, basically?
Well, you do kind of have like a bigger network. So I'm not really sure if any of your listeners or you guys have heard of it, but Ravelry is basically a free resource online that just has patterns for knitting, crochet, spinning, weaving. But that actually has a policy which you're basically not allowed to post anything to do with Trump or anything to do with his administration, which can basically result in you being banned. But that
I think we heard. I think that was in the news a bit.
Yeah, that's like a massive. It's networking within itself as well. A lot of people sort of meet each other on that, and you can share your work and things like that. It's actually really useful. So it's a massive shame that it's so paused. But you do have like a smaller groups which are actually more traditional. I've been watching a YouTube show at the moment that's Norwegian Crafts. And they do a lot of knitting and Fair Isle style knitting. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but there's a lot of there's a lot of young women who seem to be pretty traditional to the face of it. And it's weird because in Scandinavian countries, it seems to be quite normal for young women to be able to knit and sew, and a lot of them have got quite big families. They share like a lot of stuff on Instagram and things like that. But in the UK, it's not necessarily like that. It doesn't have that same community feel. But I mean, there's so many resources out there on YouTube, but it's not necessarily paused with the resources. It's more the social media virtue signaling that gets really paused.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously whoever controls the platforms has that power to dictate the politics. But I think what's interesting about kind of craft is that it has managed to survive modernity in a quite strong way. I mean, I went on a pottery throwing course over a year, and like I would say that there's been a real rebirth of small potters, and the way that they survived was basically just to keep on teaching stuff. To create space to teach other people. And again, I really like the idea of, again, going back to Panama and his guild system or whatever, but as part of that, to create like creative spaces. And again, this sounds like so cheesy and exactly the kind of things that the government funds all the time. but like, why don't we have a a right-wing pottery studio or something like that, because I think that's where people meet and you connect together physically at the same time. So.
I think that I think because like localism isn't necessarily like a thing anymore. I suppose it kind of suffers in that way. I mean, especially with like knitting and yarn and things like that. Like people don't necessarily spin their own yarn or sort of visit their local yarn shop or even like sewing and fabric and things like that, especially where I live. But I think if you go more on the outskirts, especially in North Wales, they do hold like a lot of events that are like small knitting events where you can sort of bring your own yarn that you've spun or patterns that you've done, but it is quite concentrated online more than it is locally in my experience anyway. But I do live in the city, so I might be missing some stuff.
And I would say that that craft is necessarily right wing because it teaches you to have respect for tradition, for materials. You look to see how other people in the past have solved problems that you're coming up against. So what you do is you follow tradition, and you will solve the problem by using the solution that was already there. I think it's naturally a conservative thing.
Yeah, you do definitely have to have a lot of discipline. And a lot of basic understanding of even like mathematics and things like that. So it could unironically be like an IQ problem where people just don't know basic things. But I mean, it's like our grandparents' generation, or for most of us anyway. It would have been, like I said, normal for the women to engage in these sorts of crafts, which you then would have shared with your daughter and things like that. But for my generation, that's just not the case at all. So it's just like completely lost in that respect. I mean, you either learn through YouTube and stuff, which is really great. I mean, that's where I learned most of my stuff. Or if you're lucky enough to have like a friend and things like that. But there is that local element that is really, really lacking in these spaces, I think, compared to before anyway.
Technology is interesting because, again, it has basically decimated localism. But at the same time, probably given people the ability to learn more and better than ever before. So it's interesting. I feel like it's like given the cars to a really powerful car and no one to teach you how to drive it, basically. So or even point you in the right direction. Okay, well, let's move on from networks a second, because again, I think it's an interesting point. I wanted to kind of circle back to more onto this patronage point, Alex, that you were sort of dipping into. Okay, so just wanted to start off with a question around patronage. Is good art and money inextricably linked throughout time? So has there ever been a society that has been broke and has not and has also created good art?
Well, it depends how far back you want to go. If you want to go back to sort of prehistory, you've got cave art, which is cost you absolutely nothing to do. It's completely free. It's completely democratic, but also meritocratic.
This is all subjective nonsense. You don't know the hierarchy of the cave system, Alex.
Well, that's it. Obviously they had cave universities. We just don't have the evidence for the cave universities.
Graduate degree.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends what level you're talking about, because there's always been crafts. There's always been making weapons, making clothes, making shoes, making kitchenware, as it were. I can't think offhand of any great society which has produced great art that was not, to some degree, funded by trade or conquest.
Because again, if I think in my head about, just go through the Western canon, you've got like the Dutch masters, and that's at the peak of Dutch trading. You've got the Italian Renaissance.
You got the Medicis. You've got the banking families of northern Italy, and
they're the ones that are paying for all this, aren't they?
Yeah, the Pope obviously getting his tithes.
Yeah, and I mean, it does seem that there is obviously this connection between art and money as a law of economics. I would say, it's if there's one thing that we should remember that the left never does, it's that economics is a science, not an art, and there are laws you have to obey. And the fundamental law is that an artist needs to eat if he wants to continue to live, and if you want to eat, you need money. So but it's a fact of life, isn't it? And
you need money for materials as well, and also if you're publishing. Obviously, the cost of publishing has come down recently, but if you want to publish anything, you're going to need some sort of money, even if you're just getting sort of chap books produced at your local printers. It's still going to cost you something.
Yeah, of course. It's every artist and every writer has an opportunity cost to do these sorts of things, and at the same time, you couldn't paint, I don't know, Venus at a mirror without some substantial investment in you and in your skills and in your training beforehand. So I think art is in a sense tied to money in that way.
Yeah. What do you think, Saffron? Or maybe Saffron is tied up in a bundle of wool. She can't get to the computer at the moment.
Yeah, it's all gone wrong.
She's just like a little frog all tied up in yarn.
All right. Well, it's going to be you and me for a bit then, Alexander.
Yes, because Pharaoh's been distracted. Yeah.
Right. We're gonna have to. But yes. So do you have anything to say to my point about the art and the money?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and you remember, as I said, a lot of people are following the money. This is why we've got so much pause, is because you've got the public art system, which is designed to promote certain artists and certain types of art, and certain things are just even defining things as art. Like if you were a traditionalist, you simply wouldn't say that. You would say that conceptual art just isn't art, so it's not going to be in the museums, it's not going to be paid for, it's not going to be exhibited. And you would say that things like photography or video art, you would say, oh well, that's the province of private collectors. They can do that if they want to. So even in terms of definitions, this is actually dividing up a proportion of public funding between different groups.
Yes. And I think you kind of touched on it there, but there's this thing of certain groups are funding art because it's in their interests, and the biggest group, of course, is the ruling class. And it's like when Trajan came back from his wars and commissioned enormous works of art to commemorate him and his way and his personality cult. Now you have the elites commissioning art that means nothing, or art that simply means, the supremacy of certain races over certain other races.
It's to do with supporting and representing and portraying certain client groups. It's used as a form of soft power. It's used as a form of diplomacy through. I mean, in the British case, it'd be through the British Council, which is basically the Arts Council abroad, which does that sort of thing.
I think it's also being used, as Pharaoh said in a tweet earlier today, to demoralize the target groups. Certain types of art and certain forms of art are deliberately and provocatively pushed forward. It's like the works of art commemorating Alexander in the countries that he conquered, or the big statue of Queen Victoria in India. It's a monument to the conqueror over a subjugated group of people, essentially.
Do you agree, Saffron?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a complete destruction of beauty and very anti-perfection. It's just total subversion. Absolutely. I think they sort of mask it as. Alex, you might be familiar with this, but ICOM, the International Council of Museums, in 2019 wanted to change the definition of what a museum is to be more centered around education, experience, and inspiration, whereas a traditional museum framework is centered around conservation, preservation, and knowledge. Whereas to me, it's that's just sort of sugarcoating it to make it sound good, when in reality it's just complete subversion and anti-perfection and anti-beauty.
And what it does, it turns museums into basically social centres.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And that's obviously just a route for them to spread more of the pos. It's more, it's more sort of outreach, it's more inclusion, it's more diversity, it's more, you can start discriminating between, on the basis of race and gender and identity characteristics in terms of, who you're going to patronize, who you're going to outreach, who you're going to employ as staff.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the education part just translates as complete brainwashing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think, that brainwashing again is part of what some of this art is trying to do. If you're constantly surrounded by art telling you a certain thing, you may just start to believe it,
Yeah, I mean, because it's, it's not the same thing, but whenever I go to Twitter, I always try and have my message screen up rather than any other screen, because that's the only screen that doesn't have the news feed in it. Yeah. And you get in the newsfeed, you always get this stuff about a certain illness that's going around, or left-wing talking points, and it's so depressing. And I know it's all a lie, and I know it's propaganda. I know we laugh at it, but when you see it every day when you're on there, and I only use it to communicate. Really, I'm not interested in the general sort of flow of stuff. It does weigh you down. It does get under your skin, even though you know it's a lie.
Yes, and just on a personal note, though. There is actually a plugin you can get for browser. I don't know if it's for mobile, that kind of turns off all the stuff on Twitter. So it literally just gives you your feed, and it closes all the things on the side. But yes, and I mean, think of that horrible corporate 2D art style that they do everything in now.
Oh yeah.
Like, I mean, one, of course, it's cost effective and you can just use it for nothing, and two, it's always just like an ambiguously brown person wearing the latest fashion, telling you about how great the product is. It's
wearing a hijab.
Sometimes wearing a hijab. It's like. It's pure
UN women cursed images.
UN women, Nike, gym, diversity, Burger King, Subway
World Health
Express.
Organization.
It's art that is being used purely to demoralize and wage war on the minds of the people, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
And to go back to the fundamental point of the stream, how many art graduates or art students are being used to make this stuff, or is it just an AI now? I don't even know anymore. Can we even call it art?
Well, Pharaoh would know about if there are actually any human beings involved in it.
Yeah.
The AI thing is interesting because, again, all like you see it a lot with 3D scanning nowadays, like the the woman that replaced the Colston statue, for example. Again, may look impressive.
Oh yes, yeah. There was the Colston statue was the one that was in Bristol that was pulled down, and then there was a black protester who got up on the pedestal and did a Black Power salute. So that's nothing divisive about that. And then it was Mark Wallinger got her to recreate that in his studio, and she was 3D scanned, and he took up a plastic printout. A 3D printout and placed it on the pedestal.
But I think there's something interesting there where, again, with the power of technology, it's getting increasingly difficult to determine whether or not again, if you just show that to a someone off the street, they would think that could have been sculpted, but anyone who would know better would see that it's just all fake, basically. So a real problem. Okay, great. I wanted to bring up this point around the right and where they spend their money. So obviously, just let's go outside. Yes, we want the elites to spend more cash on the art. Do we think that and obviously the kind of right elites are probably substantially smaller, especially in the UK. Like in America, at least, there are, look, Alex, I think you need to be petitioning the Pillow Man. What's he called?
Mike someone or other,
Mike Liddell or whatever.
There are Lindell.
Lindell. Just imagine you could be like the pillow patron.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, you do have private individuals who open up these fantastic private museums in America. It's quite common there. And they've got. But the thing is that usually what they've done is they've filled it with all sorts of crud, sort of Biennale crud and Frieze art fair crud and all the sorts of stuff you get in the Tate Gallery and stuff like that. So it's it's like, we've got half a dozen Jeff Koonses and we've got half a dozen of these and that's and whatever. So a lot of it is the contents are completely generic, although valuable. But yeah, we do need some people of the. I think maybe it's just a question of scale, because with a big country, with a wealthy country, with a large population, you've got just more multimillionaires and more billionaires who have money to put into that sort of thing over in America rather than here.
Yeah, and also I think they are, I hate to say it, probably more traditional or like more right wing than people are.
Yeah, I mean there are some traditionalists, and there are some investors, big art collectors there. Like for example, George Lucas. George Lucas is actually opening a museum of illustration, of sort of like traditional illustration of all periods. And there is also the Norman Rockwell Museum, which has Norman Rockwell stuff. He was the Saturday Evening Post guy who did the covers for those. There's different other traditional art museums there. So although I've said that there are people who are buying sort of places and filling it up with Jeff Koons and stuff, there are other sorts of collectors as well.
I mean, I just quickly Googled the top UK rich list. I've never heard of most of these people. I saw that Dyson's on there. James Dyson's number 4. Could we convince James Dyson?
I've never heard him say anything about culture at all.
It's interesting. Well, that's again. I feel like in America, there's much more of this. Like people are more comfortable talking about their politics at that kind of level.
And also, I think philanthropy is also more public in America as well.
Yeah, they have a whole history of it with public philanthropy, which we do in a different way here, I think.
One point I wanted to bring out was
also I would say the problem is that the state has taken over a lot of those functions. In America, the federal state is relatively weak in terms of art, although there's the endowment for the arts, National Endowment for the Arts. The Arts Council in Britain is much more powerful, significantly, and so as you'll find, like in all sort of statist, big state, big government states, that the state has taken over a lot of the roles that were previously done by private philanthropists, and so that's sort of cut philanthropy off at the knees in the UK, because most of it's done by the state. So there's no incentive and there's no kudos attached to private people doing philanthropy publicly.
I also wonder, again, just looking through who's the rich list in the UK. I mean, there's a lot of Russian names on here. There's a lot of international names, like
rich people who live in the UK as opposed to
domiciled in the UK anyway.
Taxed in the UK.
I will tell you who the greatest right-wing artistic patron is right now, and that is the guy who runs Wetherspoons, because
Tim Martin.
No, so genuinely though, because he is on a mission to preserve architecture. This man he buys up quality old buildings that were going to get destroyed, and he turns them to spoons. Yes, it's a spoons, but he sort of embalms them. It puts them in cultural aspect for future generations. And I love going around to the spoons of any city, because they're always beautiful buildings. So
is Tim Martin paying you to say this?
No, like
they're all ex-banks.
Yeah, well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. That's
Faro FC and the spoons.
That's where you're wrong. I mean, I would say
put spoons in the chat, everyone.
It's without a doubt the worst food one can buy in any of the chain pubs whatsoever. But I have to tip my hat. Or can anyone name who is the greatest right-wing philanthropist? Then go on then. I put my candidate forwards.
This is difficult.
Well, potentially it could be the royal family, but even though they are paused and they are
Probably, yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
They're not
They
going
are-
to save us, but they probably do put more money in
that's true.
than anywhere else.
Well, I mean, the thing about the royals is that they can't. It's not like the politicians where they can just leave after a while and go and like retire somewhere. They're kind of stuck with the job, aren't they?
Yeah.
For the foreseeable eternity. So, I mean, I suppose they do always have that tendency to be, more based than politicians, which is not an enormous, win in any way, but it's still something. So, yeah, I would be tempted to go with that some of the more based royals do fund trad arts. But I mean, maybe Farrah has a point about Tim Martin and his spoons.
I mean, I know we were laughing, but I mean, he is probably right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen the Prince's Foundation School of Traditional Arts. I've been to some of their shows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We talked about this at the event a bit, I think.
Yes. It's interesting because again they do things like literally icon painting, stained glass. I mean, in terms of preserving skills, you cannot deny it. But at the same time, there's literally like an Islamic calligraphy course. It's very much. It's kind of like universalist.
Defender of the faiths, plural.
Yeah, exactly. It's universal.
That's what we got in store.
In the worst kind of way, basically. But yeah, I feel like Charles probably does spend quite a bit of cash, and obviously you could talk about Poundbury as either a positive or a negative as well. But I just feel like the caliber of industrialist in the UK is just like probably way lower than America. I hate to say, in terms of like culture. Again, like I'm just trying to think of other like big names. It's kind of like Philip Green or the Sports Direct guy. It's all just kind of like these horrible people that would obviously never, they're just not cultured and not interested in culture.
No.
I remember there was a little scene that showed the interior of Alan Sugar's house, and oh boy, yeah.
Well, there's an interesting thing there because again, as someone who has moved into Essex, I should be careful what I say because they are my neighbours now. But again, they basically need to learn. I hate to say this. They just need to learn taste. Again, it's kind of like a lot of people in Essex are.
Oh, you'll fit in well.
No, but it's interesting because when you go around the area, there are some of the most amazing houses in the whole of the UK. Mansions, Victorian buildings, just absolutely beautiful. But the decor is always just in bad taste, and it's because it's.
Is it from IKEA?
It's expensive stuff, but it's kind of like just like bling stuff. It's all about kind of crystal and just this conspicuous consumption. You would never see like anything old there. It's Carlyle's point. The man who does not who reverences his own age and loves the smuts-seared mumbo jumbos and gilded mockingjays.
Yeah.
They have a love for the now and the present, but they haven't discovered the past. And I do wonder. I think there are rich people out there with more socially conservative views, but it's a lot of new money, a lot of people who haven't had that kind of generational wealth, and haven't built up the aesthetics, the generational aesthetics that the traditional aristocracy would have. Sorry.
Could I be even more cynical on these like Essex normies? I think that it's not even that they have this like love of the present that Carlyle talked about. They're just doing it because they don't know anything else, because that's what the other people have, so that's what we're going to have. Like, I honestly think they've not had any sort
of education in aesthetics or
exactly
or much history or anything. Not even at school.
And they also don't come from a place that any longer has an aesthetic or a style, of its own. So, if all the neighbours were going to the antique shops and buying, old teak, bits of furniture, then that's what they would be doing because it's what everybody else is doing. I honestly think that it doesn't go any deeper than that within their mind.
Also, they're learning to emulate this. It's a status thing. It's a class thing. They want to emulate. They want to emulate the sort of the ruling elites, as it were, and the ruling elites are firmly anti-traditional.
Yeah.
They're modernist. They are anti-nationalist. They hate people. They hate tradition. So obviously the nouveau riche are not necessarily going to imitate them, but they're certainly not going to be inspired to follow their example and become traditional, because there's no sense of aesthetic discrimination in terms of tradition in the ruling class that they are aspiring to join.
There's a couple of really interesting things there. Firstly, I think just around the kind of aesthetic training, you're 100% right, because again, it's a lot of people who will run a very successful like building or plumbing firm. They're like tradesmen, but they'll do they'll be contracting out to like Barrett, is it Bassett, Barrett, whatever the name is of that Homes
Barrett
place.
Homes.
Yeah, Barrett Homes, for example. They'll have like the deal to do the plumbing on like an entire estate, and so these people. There's a lot of people with some serious money, but who haven't. Again, they've gone down that kind of apprenticeship route. So again, like in terms of positive action for the right, I feel like we need an aesthetic mission to kind of people with money
to save Essex.
Well, but it's a general thing, because I think this is a problem for the future, where I think degrees are becoming increasingly useless in terms of generating wealth. It's the people who are going to have the cash. It's literally going to be like truckers. It's going to be HGV drivers or whatever. Someone who owns a business transporting goods or whatever. That is the future philanthropist that would need to tap into, and to convince them to put down the Swarovski diamonds and to invest in truly aesthetic art. The second point I wanted to bring up was that in terms of their taste, it is very much not the elite taste. So again, if you look at the kind of what's nice now, or if you looked in like a good Cardassian home, even, it's very, very minimalist. It's very expensive. It's lots of designer stuff, but again, there is this kind of conspicuous consumption at the same time.
No quality.
But so again, I feel like they are trying to. Was it Panama? You said they just don't know any better. They're just kind of doing.
Everybody
stuff.
else is doing it, so they're doing it. I mean, that's the condition of most normies on everything. It's that other people do it, so we'll do it.
But I do feel like there is potential there. That's where I genuinely think, in terms of like a class of people who have money, and if introduced to the ideas, but I don't know where you would start. But
I've got a question here for Saffron. So recently there's been these sort of boom in love coaches. It's like a sort of social media thing, like sort of life coaches, but for like the whole of your love life and your personal life.
Oh, okay.
Could you have something like that, like a culture therapist, or a culture, or like a personal aesthetic shopper or something like that? Could you see that working?
Sounds pretty cringe.
Like something a Guardian columnist.
Of course it's cringe. But, I mean, could it work? Could we use it?
I don't know. I don't think most people are necessarily interested in aesthetics. I mean, I think what you guys said is ultimately true. People will just sort of go with the flow. But possibly, maybe for like middle class mums, that might work. But for most normies, I don't necessarily think they'd be interested in that.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously people with disposable income. I mean, you're not talking about, Yeah.
One parallel to that would be Georgian England, and if you've ever seen The Rake's Progress, he gets surrounded at one time by a variety of like cultural suitors. Let's just say there is the dancing instructor, the tailor, the fencing instructor, the duelist. It's this kind of like naive. The Rake's Progress is a story of a naive country squire come to London, and as soon as as soon as he descends on London, he is kind of surrounded by essentially like grifters trying to kind of educate him, quote unquote, about society and the ways to do things. So there has been precedent for that. Although I think Hogarth's picturing of them was quite damning. But the same's true for Dickens and David Copperfield. You know, when he first comes to London, and it's when he gets like that suit from the local tailor talking about the London styles or whatever. So there are these kind of figures who are kind of like cultural nodes. I do think you can influence them. Whether it's a love coach, I don't necessarily think that's the greatest idea. But I don't know how you would move those people. But I think it's an interesting question.
The whole time you guys have been talking about this, I've just been thinking of the Dino box meme. Have you seen that?
Yeah,
no.
I love the Dino meme. Do you want to explain it to
what is this?
Okay, so the Dino box is like sort of like a metrosexual man, and he's sort of got like a trophy bimbo wife, and they sort of live in like a new build British house, and they've got like a Range Rover, and like it's just like a funny meme. You have to get it up for experience.
If you can link it, Saffron. This is something like
okay,
Randy,
I'll have a look.
I tried to get Randy on. Unfortunately, he wasn't available tonight. He often talks about on Twitter. And
Yes,
it's kind of like it's a pastiche of this kind of new new money, like I guess kind of like old working class family that is trying to become middle class or like trying to get some kind of status for themselves. But it's similar. It's kind of like they sort of end up in a position where they just can't. They just don't know how to live their life. So it ends up being a real nightmare. Okay, hold on a second. I've got the.
Oh my goodness!
sorry in advance.
Oof! Yes.
This is it. So you can see in the background. Look at this.
Oh God, these are literally your neighbours, aren't they, Farrow?
It's literally. To be fair, the houses around where I live are magnificent. But
yeah, you wouldn't live in one of these.
It's a really interesting archetype again, because again this is sort of like this is money through purely materialist lens with no aesthetic whatsoever.
These people will still like go to the same clubs every weekend. They'll still fly off to fucking Ibiza, every 2 weeks.
The second one's kind of brutal. I mean, it kind of turned my stomach a bit.
Go
There's so many of these. It doesn't.
This is why. This is why money has to be in the hands of an aristocracy. Surely, this is the argument laid out. Yeah, there they are. That's your modern British middle class, socially mobile couple. Yeah,
it's pretty bad. Is there any hope though? Can we?
Saffron, what have you done to this channel? Why you invite on Saffron, the meme queen, and she's destroyed your reputation, Farrow.
You're a better man than I if you can look at this picture and then go, "Well, chaps, is there any hope?"
But again,
this is what they want.
No. I think there is something. I think if you did it generational, it would be a long-term. My long-term mission to the Dinos: I will go out into the wilderness.
No. Remember what Nietzsche said, Farrow: "Gaze ye not into the abyss, lest the abyss gaze also into you."
That's true. I will become the biggest Dino of them all. You see, eventually.
Oh God, Dino Farrow is going to be cursed.
Cosmetically enhanced abyss.
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
So, I mean,
my eyes have started bleeding.
Can we glean anything else from this picture?
Oh, sorry. No. But it's interesting because it does show to me it's people that they want something. They feel the intrinsic need to try and transcend, but because of that purely materialistic lens.
What do you mean? Transcend what?
But he's desperately trying to raise the tone. He's just babbling.
No. Listen a second. This is actually true. That like why aren't they just living in in the same houses that they always have? This is what's fascinating to me about the Essex mindset, because again, it comes out of they're all from the East End, right? And they've always had this attitude of like being the best on the street and very house proud, and it's that mentality of wanting to look good, and to try and do better for themselves. But
we should explain to Americans that this is basically white flight.
It's more complicated, because it's all to do with World War II and certain basically people leaving London and a certain other group of people moving in. Anyway,
Yeah.
I want to be a bit.
Okay, we're not going to go into that here.
Yeah, but my point is that they are trying to grasp for something. But my point is that another set of peoples, or peoples who are correctly trained, would have gone for a higher aesthetic or a higher thing in their life, is what I'm trying to say. But I do wonder if there is hope in the long term.
Given some of the things I've read about the history of the people in this country, I'm partly convinced that this is actually a long-standing thing. That there would have been a working class Londoner in, say, 1890 who would have made a load of money in something vulgar, got on a train to the provinces, and gone to meet some lord out in the provinces, and he would have worn a really gaudy collar and a cheap suit that looks really ritzy, and a big top hat and gleaming gold buttons, and it would have been the period equivalent of what we just saw, basically.
That's what a lot of Jane Austen is. It's avoiding the trade, because the trade is new money. Is, as you say, I mean, it's this fine class distinctions, where the people who get the new money, they spend all their money in the wrong places, and they don't know the etiquette, they don't know the pronunciation. And they keep on tripping up, and of course the impoverished sort of gentry sort of snigger at them, but of course they're desperate to marry into them to get the money.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is it's that situation. Apart from all the aristocracy is dead, apart from so they've sort of taken over again. But yeah, it's an interesting question, and I still think that again that there is the potential for patronage. With the right people, but I think it requires something to happen to kind of move the people, whether it is getting a recognition or some attention to be paid. But I just wanted to challenge everyone on that. Okay, I want to move on to the next point, and that's around conservative donors spending on politics versus art. Do you think that's a big thing? Is it true in the UK? I mean, I would say definitely true in the US. Is it true in the UK? And is it a problem?
Who is the average Conservative Party donor? Let's work that one out first.
A construction company.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Well, I mean, it sounds like a silly question almost, but I mean, how interested are construction companies in art?
Well, the question is, are their owners? Okay, I'm pulling up a live list. I'm having to venture into a depressing place.
Conservativeparty.com.
No, the Independent. Even worse.
Oh God.
I'm trying to find it. Alex, do you want to come in? What's your thoughts? Do you is too much being spent on politics? If we spent all our money on arts, would we solve the problem?
Well, I think it's slightly different in Britain because we don't have direct elections for many things. Unfortunately, we've got directly elected mayors in some places, which is a flipping disaster. But we don't have elections for sort of state positions or whatever. We don't have elections for sheriffs or county this or county that. So the political money, when it goes basically into the pockets of the big parties, and there are basically two main parties and a bunch of smaller parties in Britain. and they tend to swallow everything up, and that tends to go into sort of like maybe some local races, sort of for MPs and stuff, and maybe for councillors, but not much.
Okay, I've got the list. Malcolm Healy, owner of Wren's Kitchen, is number one. I know Wren's Kitchens. John Gore, theatre production tycoon. Peter Hargreaves, financial services. Lots of hedge funds in here. Jonathan Wood, hedge fund. Peter Wood, founder of Direct Line. There's Sir Ehud Scheleg. Is that a Welsh name?
Pardon me.
What does he do?
He's a Tory party treasurer who's given a knighthood under Theresa May, which probably tells you everything about him that you need to know.
Bit slimy. So what was the question being asked?
The question is:
are they putting too much money into politics and not enough into arts, or would it be more productive to put it into arts?
Not for these individuals, because their goal isn't the long-term strength of the country. It's keep the Conservative Party in power so I can keep my monopoly on insurance or construction or whatever. That's why they're giving money to these parties in the first place.
So someone in the chat asks about Saatchi. Is Saatchi on that list?
Not anymore.
I think he was. He was originally he worked for the Conservative Party, the Conservative government in the 80s. He was a supporter of the Conservative Party then. I think once he got into art, he kind of got out of politics because of course the contemporary art world is very strongly left wing.
He became friends with Blair as well, didn't he? At one point,
yeah.
After having done the advertising campaign against Blair in '97, funnily enough. But yes, I mean, as I said, my answer to the question is, well, no, because again, they're not people like us who have long-term interests at heart. It's purely, I need to keep the government putting up houses on green spots so I can keep making money. I think it's a very simple mechanism.
Saffron.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just totally black-pilled on that question. Sorry, Farrell. I've got no answers.
Fair enough. I think I very much agree with Panama. The quality of potential patron is very, very low right now, and again, I think fundamentally it's I think we're kind of mocking the Dinos for having no aesthetic training. I think you could say very much the same with anyone from that list. I would say that they would know the people to hire that may have some or something like that. Do you know what I'm saying? They'll probably hire in a fancy architect or whatever that still has at least a wisp of aesthetics in their soul or whatever. But in general, these people are devoid of arts. Now, as to the question whether I think it's better to spend money on art or politics, I think one concern I have with people's attitudes is that you can become just like a rank utilitarian and be like, everything that we do should be for action or for positive change in the world, etc., etc. But as a Christian, I think there's an interesting biblical precedent to invest in the aesthetics, and there's a famous passage where Judas, there's like a woman who basically pours out some really expensive like perfume on Jesus's feet, and he's like, if you sell that perfume, you could feed a whole lot of poor people. And Jesus is like no, this is more important. Which again, it just like smashes the utilitarian worldview, and I think
It's the idea of, you devote some of your worldly wealth to the praise of God and to the praise of beauty, because it's a form of worshipping God. And
Yes,
it's
exactly.
noticeable that when the Lutherans and the Calvinists, Highlander, attacked the churches, when I did my research for the book Iconoclasm, I found that a lot of the reasons that people gave for destroying icons and for destroying lamps and stuff, which had to be sort of paid, people had to make donations towards putting oil in the lamps to burn eternally and so forth. That a lot of the people who were smashing icons in the Swiss cities in the sort of 1510s and 1520s, they were giving explicit reasons that were utilitarian, saying this money should not go on the finery of the church. This money should go directly to the poor. So they were they had a sort of a socialist,
we've heard
utilitarian
that
argument.
It's interesting because, again, I think conversely, just imagine a church that the priest was wearing robes of gold and there's gold everywhere, etc., and they didn't actually do anything with the money to help anyone. So that there is a line, and I think going back to this politics versus art, or what it really is, utility versus aesthetic, that there is always a line. But I think and I think that changes depending on the age we're in, and I think we're in this age of darkness and grey and lack of aesthetic, and so now I think it is more important than ever. And also, if you see the amount of effect that your every single pound has on politics, you're probably getting better value for money creating a painting that will last, hopefully, an eternity or near to that, 1,000 years, compared to lining the pockets of a politician that doesn't even care for you. So that's
but perhaps it would be prudent to bring up at this point, though, given the artistic and cultural climate we live in which non-accepted, non-sort of PC artists and all sorts of things are kind of kept under a wrap, so to speak, by not being given any push at all. Even if you were like some church figure, perhaps, or just a businessman who'd become based, or some kind of wealthy old traditionalist, like how exactly do you then find the traditional artist? Because I think we've talked about quite a bit on this channel and the streams we've done about how the actual skills of traditional artists are beginning to go, or in some cases have gone. So if you want your beautiful fresco or mural or some nice portrait, like you can hire a popular artist that may literally not have the skills to do it, because their work is entirely like 3D print sculpture cast making or something, like it's like they literally don't have the artistic skill to do it for you, and because there's no network for the young sort of trad artist that knows how to do it, then the connection can't be made there. Is that not something we should sort of introduce to this?
Well, that's what I was sort of trying to allude to with some of the network stuff I was mentioning.
I agree with Panmure.
Yeah, because you're right. I think there are more right-wing artists and crafters out there, but because they don't have the degree which creates those connections, it's harder to organise and harder to find those connections.
I think that if we do make a concentration on backing, either founding or backing schools that are traditional, either in architecture or art or crafts, that what will happen is that people with money who have to hire a craftsman or whatever, or to hire an artist or an architect, they will go to those schools and say, who have you taught? Who are your star students who have come out recently? Are any of your staff actually practicing? Because they should be practicing, but do they have any recommendations and stuff? So if you've got these centers of learning, and also you've got centers of knowledge, so if you found a couple of sort of traditionalist artistic libraries, then these could be nodes that people could go to.
That's what I think. I think the idea of the space, again, going back to the guild idea, you would have like the guild hall, for meetings and for celebrating, but also for training as well. The guilds acted as both employer, educator, aesthetic guide. There's something interesting there. I mean, there were some attempts to create them. Famously, obviously, my man John Ruskin created his own guild, which didn't last. It didn't work. So I think I am going to spend some time trying to analyze the failures of the 19th century guilds. My favorite one is the Blind Beggars Guild. Have you ever heard of this before?
No.
Yeah, it's an arts and crafts group that they only hired like blind, deaf or dumb people. So it was kind of like a social enterprise, and they would do silver work. So it was just an interesting concept. But again, a lot of that went after the First World War, basically.
So that might be like a precursor of what was that? There was a recent scheme. It continued. Something like that continued, but it was a government scheme, and it was specifically for employing people who were blind or deaf or something like that.
Yeah.
And that recently closed. It was sort of folded into the general sort of social services, which I think was a mistake.
Yeah. Okay, I want to move on to the next point on the little speech. This idea that artists are like businesses. So again, he kind of brings it back to this idea of the venture capitalist. So anyone who doesn't know the startup scene, he kind of references a unicorn. Now, a unicorn is a business that makes over $1 billion. So the whole idea of venture capitalists is that you're looking to invest a small amount of cash on a number of businesses with a hope through your understanding of business and the marketplace, etc., that you can turn one of your $200,000 investments into $1 billion. Do we think art works in that kind of way? Should we think about art as a business almost? Alex, you going first?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, the value of things goes up because of both, like rarity and demand. So, and I think that you have to be, obviously, there are certain goods that are never going to be mass appeal. They're going to be luxury goods, as it were. And I know that the right actually sort of a lot of the reactionary right just sort of think of this as terrible, based in a bad way, materialistic view of things, and they and especially Christians, they want to say the value of art does not reside in its monetary value, it resides in its aesthetic qualities, and obviously I would agree with that, but the better the aesthetic qualities, usually the higher the price and the greater the demand and so forth. I think it's tricky because obviously you've got a general populace and even an art consumption populace that's not going to be experiencing these things. It's not going to be encountering these things because a lot of this stuff is not going to be in public galleries because public galleries won't show traditional stuff. So how are people going to find out about it? It's a bit difficult.
Well, that in my mind is exactly why I think you can't treat art like a business or even as an investment, because the problem with using the market for value on an aesthetic item is it just depends on who was alive at the time. And again, as time has gone, like you're right, Alex, like if you were to see what are the most expensive paintings, etc., it's usually like I would say it's relatively justified at the top end. Again, correct me if
in terms of old art, yeah,
exactly. However, I mean, in my mind, it's inevitable as time goes on, as we embrace subjectivity as a whole. What if we end up with a generation of elites that just can't, that doesn't even have hasn't even got that inheritance of understanding that an old master's good. It's really interesting. I occasionally I do occasionally pop back to the Guardian once in a while, and there is this weird cognitive dissonance around some of the art sections, because there is a lot of old and traditional art there, and they do hold it up as like as kind of beautiful. But you see that no one interacts with those pages at all, and it always kind of gets removed. So, do you see what I'm saying? You can't have the ideology of decolonization, of equality, and traditional aesthetics at the same time. It just, you can't square it.
And I would also mention antiques, because the value of antiques has plummeted, and that's basically to do with aesthetics. It's not to do with supply or demand. Well, it's to do with reduced demand, because people grow up with minimalist or cheap furniture, and they don't see the value in buying old furniture or appreciating the aesthetics of past periods. And, like, people will dismiss whole periods like the Victorians as being sort of too heavy, too ornate, and so forth. And so there is a complete rejection of antiques. And so you've seen basically a whole generation, basically none of them would consider buying antiques. They might inherit something from their parents, but basically the problem is that they can't integrate some of these heirlooms into their modern houses, because they don't have the space, they don't have the aesthetics. Everything's like sort of silver or grey or clean. There's no sort of polished wood and so forth. So it's difficult for the antiques market, which has completely plummeted.
I imagine they also don't feel any tangible connection to the world from which those products came.
Yes, yeah, they've been deliberately, forcibly separated from their tradition of their people. Yeah,
not even that they've been taught to hate it. They just don't know what it is. They don't have any concept of it, I think.
Well, except of course now that you go to some places and they're being taught in school that Georgian architecture and everything from the Georgian period is based on slave money, so therefore it's tainted. Yeah. So they are being in some cases they are being deliberately driven away from tradition, because it's being linked with the sort of the original sin of slavery and colonization.
And this is actually something I brought up when we had our initial discussion, Alex, because of this antique drop. I know again personally. I mean, I'd say I have modest means in terms of where I spend my money. In terms of artistically, I would say that more than half of it goes on antiques as opposed to new commissions, because it's the quality that you can get is actually just ridiculous. Again, for the price, and obviously like with furniture, like you can only get like certain mahoganies and stuff like that from antiques, etc. It's virtually impossible to get them nowadays. So in some ways, this antique collapse, I think, is fueling a slight right-wing art collapse as well, because people are just sinking all of their cash into old things as opposed to new things.
Yeah.
Any comments on that? No. Okay.
Well, no, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Saffron, what's your thoughts? Do you think do you think arts and crafts can be treated like a venture capitalist?
No, I don't think so. No. They should only be enjoyment and spiritual experience. It should not be treated in that way. I guess if you're skilled in a particular way where you can create a product, like I've done myself quite a few times, that totally can be a good thing. But generally, my answer to that question is no.
I agree with that, and I think that the whole point of view of discussing art purely in monetary terms is something that the artist has to do as part of their personal finance, as opposed to, I don't think it's really proper to discuss art in that way as a wider subject, at least.
I've also got some other problems with the way that thinking about artists as there are some unicorns and some not. I mean, I'm not sure I even feel like that's just how things are. Like obviously there are great men and great artists, but is it just greatness and then nothing else? I didn't know about that. I think there is worth in smaller artists at the same time. But
I think our perception has been distorted because we are thinking in terms, you're right, of either great or nothing. And that's because I think a lot of the times that art is no longer a living part of people's lives. So they're not settling for competent or very good because they're not commissioning family portraits anymore. You know, they're getting photographs done. They're not commissioning landscapes. They're buying a print of a landscape and so forth. So they're being disconnected. They're only seeing the very best museum art in museums, and they're also in reproduction and in publications, and they're not getting the middle ground at all. I mean, there's just no reason why they would encounter it unless they make a point of visiting local exhibitions or smaller museums.
Okay, one other thing I wanted to bring up was around this immediacy as well. So the last line in this is that, and they want it in 6 months. You know, part of where this guy is saying, you know, he like a lot of conservatives want results immediately. You know, Alex, I guess from your perspective, you're looking for cold hard cash right now, but do you feel like there is too much of this short-termism versus, you know, creating something bigger? Or like, I'm just trying to think historically, because again, the Medicis didn't really think about like that, did they? They didn't think, I'm going to invest in this art school. They just found the best person at the time and
yeah, they were choosing the best artists, and also these were court artists as well. So these were people they would have personal contact with. So they were not just paying for the artifacts themselves; they were paying for the time and the conversation and the elevation. And they were getting this from their courtiers, who were poets, who were writing poetry, and they had composers and musicians, you know, both performing and writing music, you know, specific to their needs and taste. In terms of income, well, I mean, you know, yeah, well, investors, well, yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, much as I would love to say, oh, you should invest in people like, you know, artists like me and buy my stuff, or, you know, sort of get Saffron to do some limited edition something or other, which you can market or collect. Much as I would love that, I mean, it's probably not that good as an investment. You can invest in art and you can make money, but it's largely at a blue chip level, and that requires a lot of money, unless you're going into a fund with other people. Yeah, that's out of most people's reach.
Okay.
All I'm saying is the Alexander Adams X Saffron sock, limited edition sock.
Awesome.
You guys need to make that collaboration happen. That's all I'm saying. That'll be worth millions in years to come. I just want to go back to something you said about the courts, because I thought that was really interesting. Because again, in terms of, you know, a place where artists can be patronized, that they sort of come and go. They're poached from others. I don't know if anyone saw the. This is obviously quite lowbrow watching, so excuse me. The Leonardo da Vinci thing on Amazon Prime that came out this year. But basically,
I heard about it.
Yeah, they had a lot about, but it was interesting because again, it just showed the importance of the court, and again, someone being brought to court as an artist. I mean, I'm going to throw this to Hat, but I obviously know what you're going to say. But I'd like your thoughts on it. Do we think that again the decline of the aristocracy has removed that networking space, or like what was the value of court to artists, do you think, historically?
Well, I would begin with a Gomez Davila quote, as ever, that rich people are only harmless when there is an aristocracy there to look down on them. And basically, I think that the aristocracy traditionally was a combination of wealth and taste, basically. That the middle class generally has the wealth, but not the taste, as we saw earlier. So I do think that a large part of the decline in quality has been caused by the decline of the aristocracy. because traditionally, it was not just the rich, it was the tasteful who funded art. So basically, yes, I'm fully aristo-pilled in that regard.
But anything specifically about court and courtly life? Because again, I mean, the court was still pretty important up until even in the 19th century.
It became. I mean, the thing about courts is that they very quickly become quite dangerous political games, and you have to form alliances and sort of battle your way through depending on the type of court. So, courtly life was very important to artists of all stripes. Poets and musicians and all sorts, to win favor with the king and with the powerful ministers. It was. I don't know. I mean, I suppose historically, if we look back at it, a lot of art is overshadowed by the aristocratic and merchant funding, but the courtly art was an entirely different thing to itself.
It's interesting. It's always had that separate strand. So again, if you look at the art within like 19th century art, for example, the art of the merchants versus the art of the court, totally different. So for example, the pre-Raphaelites, when they came about in the 1850s, were mainly brought up by the kind of nouveau riche, factory owners, shop owners, etc. Tate, for example, sugar manufacturer, owned loads of water houses and stuff like that. So while the kind of the court of Queen Victoria almost had its own separate artistic bubble, with a separate set of aesthetic rules and regulations. So I think it's interesting. I think I do wonder whether the decline of the aristocracy has erased that network effectively. So you're only left with the kind of the kind of merchant viewpoint on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one of the last things I wanted to bring up was Alex, you sent across a couple of points to me, and we've covered the first one, I feel, but the second one was about the avant-garde, and I thought this is kind of interesting. Could create some good discussion. I don't know if you want to kind of voice your opinions on the problems with traditionalism and the avant-garde.
Yeah, so set out briefly, this is something that is available in the book of the event. So if any of you have bought the book for the event in August, you'll be getting my talk, which covered this sort of slightly, in sort of rough terms, setting it out in context. So basically, it's how traditional do we want to go? Because obviously people who were sort of anti-paused or opposed to the left and so forth, or skeptical about state art as it is now in the West, a lot of them are sort of traditional. Now, the problem is, if you put all your eggs in that basket and you start saying, well, if we ever get power or influence or so forth, we're only going to put money into traditional stuff, which I think is fine. It's perfectly fine. But if you start going anti-modern, not necessarily anti-postmodern, but anti-modern, you're going to start alienating large groups of people who, influential people with money, people who could be useful, who could be won over. How prescriptive do you want to be on traditionalism, bearing in mind that this would naturally alienate some people who would be potential supporters, potential creators, and so forth? Or does accepting any of the modernism automatically lead to socialism and all the pulse that comes with that?
Mm.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question.
Yeah.
I think there is a problem, certainly online anyway, with right-wingers sort of being anti-modern art to the extent where it can be a little bit annoying. But I'm not really sure. It's a really hard question. I don't feel like I'm equipped to really answer it, really.
I mean, there's an element to which one has to just use their own intellectual nuance to work it out, I think. Because, I mean, look at the recent streams on Andy Warhol that have been done on AA's channel, in which you if you look at the works of Warhol on a certain level, you can see all these deeply traditional things, like, you know, and a lot of quite heavily reactionary ideas and themes that run through the work. And yet they're completely surrounded by posed people, posed institutions, and a posed time in which the art was produced. So you know, it's and if you're a truck about it, then you won't be able to see the gold that's hidden within the muck. But you know, I think that's the purpose of streams like that in this community, at least, is to bring that out. And I mean, this is a problem that afflicts poetry particularly harshly, because for example, you have institutions like the Society of Classical Poets, who do things like they teach, they actually have an effort to teach in schools, you know, traditional verse and form and meter and all this sort of thing, which is admirable. But the trouble is that it doesn't matter if you've written a bad poem that's a triple rhymed sonnet, it's still a bad poem, you know. And there's this problem in that there's, I think, too much of an obsession on the right with form and kind of superficiality when it comes to art, that people think a piece of art is good because it looks trad, you know. It's like it's the meme of, you know, the fash wave with the marble pillars, you know. It's this, you know, this is what they think this is what trad art is, you know. Well, if the poem rhymes and looks like a sort of Wordsworthian piece on clouds, then it's a good poem, you know. It's this issue, and I think we have to move past it. We have to become better at art as a whole, I think. Being able to actually, you know, have the nose to see what a good painting is, what a good poem is, what a good book is, you know, who writes well, who paints well, who sculpts well, beyond simply form.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that the right-wing position would be to cultivate an aristocratic discrimination in terms of quality, not in terms of style.
Not form. And of course, I mean, it's the case for many artists and also writers that it's compulsory to use the contemporary forms, because that is actually how you engage in art. You know, you can't simply plant your flag arbitrarily in 17 something and just decide to do art that was you know, that was contemporary then, because you say, well you could do that for any year, you know. Why have you arbitrarily just pick one of these? I think there is a demand placed on the artist to respond to his age in some way, even if it's an age as horrible as ours, in which you have to kind of reject it. You still have to work with it in some aspect. So you know, it can't be this superficiality around form. You're looking for values in the art, not strictly form.
Yeah, I would say that if you look at the canon, you'll never find a really great artist who is appreciated after his time, who was a retrograde, who was someone who was working like in a style 100 years out of date. You never find that. It's always someone who is working at the best of their ability in the art of their time, not in a style from like 300 years ago.
Yeah.
But hold on a second, though. Like I think this is where people slightly go wrong with discussing traditional art, because what I think it means for me is it's about rootedness. You know, you mentioned those values. You're 100% right, Had, but it's because it's a series of values from the past, and it's about connection with that. I think the problem with modernity is due to the, you know, deracinated nature that we live in. That connection has been chopped off, and that's why people are sort of almost it's kind of like a tree trying to find like roots in concrete or something like that. You know, it's desperately trying to find any kind of source, and that's why people will just choose random, like you said, just arbitrary dates at the same time. But I think for me the problem is, you still, if you want to create good art, it has to have that rootedness at the same time. And so I'm less negative about aping some forms to start with, as long as it's built from that place. And I think
I must reiterate that what you're attached to is the value in my conception of things. You're like, for example, when I look at one of the Renaissance paintings of Venus, it's not that I'm attached to the Dutch Renaissance. I'm attached to the values of beauty and things like,
it is technique as well, though, and that's where I think the form comes in there. So, for example, like a particular motif, how something's laid out, a medium, for example, like that. It isn't just the metaphysical idea behind the painting. It can also be again, like this revival of a like there can be a physical element to it, but I think going back to your point, we cannot just ape the past. It has to have that modernity in it. As you said, even if it is, even
you have to work with something.
Yeah,
I mean, but this isn't. I don't want to give the impression I'm saying, well, you have to write about like current things that are happening, right? You can, if you're a poet, there's nothing stopping you from going out into like going for a walk somewhere and writing a poem about the grass or the hills or the flowers. There's like or if you're a painter, there's nothing stopping you from going and painting a portrait of somebody who's aesthetically appealing, or of a landscape, or you don't. This isn't to say that you have to paint politics. You just have to engage with the world around you, and it's up to the artist to choose what aspects of it you engage with. But you can't just cling to the art of ages past in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last point for tonight, and that was I want to talk about this avant-garde point in a little bit more detail. And Alex, you were kind of pointing out the important need to appeal to the avant-garde as an outlet for youthful rebellion and alternate elites. How important do you think the avant-garde within any generation is in art?
Yeah, so basically this is another point that I brought up in my talk, and that's basically something that Pareto says, that there has to be a certain amount of elite circulation. So although you've got your ruling elite, you've also got outside elites, but they can be accepted. You can accept some parts, some individuals, some small groups, that they get absorbed into the ruling elite. So you have a degree of change, which is to do with competency. So really competent individuals who are not part of the ruling elite can become part. And basically I'm saying that, if you go full trad and you say that any sort of anything after a certain date in terms of style or whatever is forbidden, what you can end up having a problem with is you can have like every generation naturally wants to differentiate. In psychological terms, it wants to differentiate itself from its parents by doing something slightly different. And if you automatically turn avant-garde, or at least some development in the towards vanguardism as a forbidden fruit, you've automatically incentivized each generation to push for maximum avant-gardism, maximum sort of causing a splash and differentiating themselves by taking up advanced art or progressive art or whatever. So that's a problem, is that you suddenly turn a natural human desire, and also a business thing. You want to distinguish yourself from the generation that came before. You want to do something that's slightly more fashionable. You want to carve out your own field. But the problem is, of course, if you suddenly turn the avant-garde into a forbidden fruit, what you're doing is you're incentivizing the natural proclivity of each generation, and you're turning it into a political act.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Panama Saffron, what's your thoughts on the importance of winning the avant-garde?
I think that, I mean, this is probably taking it too technical, but I mean, like, by avant-garde, would you be counted as that if you were simply a movement doing something different to what the average artist is doing? You know, like if you,
Yeah.
like, I suppose winning the avant-garde is a good thing. I'm not convinced it's vital, just because so many avant-gardes end up collapsing immediately. And
and also having horrible ideas and advancing horrible ideas and advancing horrible politics. Exactly. I'm not saying that you should have the avant-garde. It's just the problem is that if you automatically turn the avant-garde into like a bogeyman, suddenly you've incentivized lots of each generation to push for that, just simply to stick two fingers up to the older generation.
Well, see, that's it.
I mean,
I always see them as a destructive force. You know, that they are like a wrecking ball. So I think you could get mild utility out of them in a way of destroying what's there currently. But I'm just not sure that the avant-garde plays a part in traditional Western canon. Like, was Fra Angelico
Leonardo was avant-garde at the time. He was inventing all sorts of, the sfumato and the chiaroscuro and stuff. He was innovating stuff.
Again, I think maybe it's just a semantics thing. I always see it as like, but he was part of the system at the same time. He trained as an apprentice or whatever. You know, he was like, in my mind, the avant-garde is almost like a form of parallelism or whatever. It's a vanguard of young rebels, like you said. It's just an interesting question.
It's very. I mean, I agree. You obviously have to have part for tradition. You have to extend that tradition. You have to sort of innovate within that tradition. But obviously, it depends where you draw your line. I mean, what is avant-garde and what is simply extending tradition.
I guess to your point, you just need to be careful about the lines.
I don't suggest we embrace the avant-garde automatically just in order to avoid this problem. I think obviously that's a problem. The avant-garde is as dangerous as stasis, so you've got to strike a balance somewhere.
Yeah. One last thing on the kind of tradition point that just came to me while we were discussing was that I was always affected by Vasari's Lives of Artists, and when he talks about the first person in that, and obviously for those who don't know, it's a book all about kind of Renaissance artists. But he starts off with Kimberway, and it talks about how Kimberway he was trained by these kind of Greek icon masters, and then Kimberway's first big icon got like toured around the town basically. But I always thought that was interesting that the Renaissance in his mind started with this reconnection to an effectively a lost art form from taught by someone else, and so that's what I'm talking about with the rootedness and the reconnection, and also the importance of technique in that regard.
For Vasari's very much his history is it's a narrative one, and it's leading up to the point of Michelangelo being the apex, being the greatest artist of all time, and everything. It's like a teleological thing, so it's like every artist was basically leading up to Michelangelo.
Yeah, which and again, I think that you obviously have to be careful of that, but it did make me think about stuff. Okay, I want to round it out there for tonight. I just want to say thank you so much. Let's do some kind of last thoughts. Alex, do you want to just have a last kind of sentence on your thoughts on the kind of mess we're in?
I would say that the right does need to invest more in culture, and it does need to be less short term. But obviously we're facing so many problems from the left that you can't entirely turn your back on politics, even if the people I don't know actually. So looking at the Conservatives and the Republicans, I think, oh, sod it, you might as well give up on that.
Wow. The black pills on this stream.
I have been black pills.
The black. I mean, you know, hopeful Pharaoh brings us on. try to get us to pull something together, and we just black pill everybody. You know, unreliable guests.
Hat's last comment.
If you're interested in making art, then hunt for values. Hunt for the eternal things that have made past arts great, and then further those values. Don't ape art. Find the values and carry them forward. And if you're rich, then give money to based artists. You know? Don't
Saffron.
be a Dino.
Don't be a Dino. Saffron.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try not to be too black-pilled, but I think localism is definitely key. Keeping traditional crafts alive is super important, and just try and stay clear-pilled and meet like-minded people and try and build communities is really important, and just try not to stay disheartened by all the paused libtardation if you can.
Yeah, that was a very positive message. I think for me, what stood out to me is really this network thing, and how can we connect together.
Yes.
You know, obviously we need to do our alternative summer exhibition. You know, we'll have next year, 2022. I will bring the London Secession. I'm gonna speak to Mr. Weatherspoons. He's going to supply us the money that we need to start an alternative.
I tell you what, if you want to start that, you want to do it outside of London.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I think.
Sorry,
I was going to say, I think, no, that's a really, really good idea, is trying to do like a sort of like private underground exhibition, you know, mixed mediums of everything and anything, poetry, paintings. I think that would be really, really cool. And it would like bring energy, which is totally what I think.
Based dice Thedford.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah, we could do that.
Only if you do it in a
you could do it in Wales as well.
Yeah.
Come over. We'll happily receive all you based Englishmen to do a nice Thedford.
I forgot how Welsh centric the panel is.
Yeah.
The
Welsh Mafia strikes again.
Shilling. Let's the
Owen approved.
Yeah, Owen approved. Let the shilling begin. You know, I think a lot of people will be saying, you know, I can't afford some art. You know what you can afford? You can afford to help a starving artist by hit the description button right now on this video. If you look on it, there is an Amazon link, and that Amazon link contains a series of books that Alexander Adams needs to write his next big work, his next big piece. You could be part of that. You could be the guy that got the book that created a sentence in the next book. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Dr. Steve Turley. Yes, that's right. There's an Amazon link. So it's just for books that would help me write reviews or articles, also to write books and to prepare for the stream. And I know that there were some people commenting that there were a couple of classic art historical texts were not on the list. And obviously I'm sort of working my way through them. Some of them already have. But so if you do that, that would be great. Also, if you want to support independent art, not to do with me specifically, but there's the artist newsletter called the Jackdaw. So if you go to thejackdaw.co.uk, they publish 6 issues every year of art reviews, art theory, commentary. It's pretty based. It's very independent. Lots of different views. They publish 2 to 4 different exclusive articles by me, but also they have different critics. They've got traditionalists. They've got a couple of modernists there. You can publish letters, and you can also you could submit your own art reviews. They also do a page for artists. So if you've got a statement and you've got a few pictures that you want to display, they publish this also. So please consider subscribing to the print version of the Jackdaw. Okay,
Saffron. Like I've noticed that the sticker shilling has gone down massively. Have you closed the store?
Oh, so Etsy sent me 2 warnings that resulted basically if I didn't remove all the frogs, then I would eventually get fully kicked off. I have quite a few different stores on there, but they are all anonymous. I don't share them online, so
Take them to court, Saffron.
but I just basically decided to just take all the frogs off, which is super sad, but I mean, I'm over it now.
Cancel culture works.
Terrible.
This is literally so sad. What's the next big project? Are you? Because I saw you did some tufting or something like that. Are you?
Yeah. As soon as I finish my my master's dissertation, I'm gonna try and do some. I've been working on doing a lot of rugs. I've got like this big rug gun and this big frame, which is really cool. I want to do more screen printing, woodworking. I'd really like to do some ceramics as well. That would be really fun. But yeah,
coming next year.
Yes, coming next year.
The Gesamtkunstwerk, the Saffron aesthetic. You could buy your house, and it's got everything apparently made. Saffron's going to make everything. So
it's going to be premiered at the Baystay Stedfod.
Yes, loads of frogs.
That'd be so. You should actually do that as like you should have like a showroom, just like wall-to-wall frogs, basically.
Oh, I'd love that. I think that would be really cool.
Hat. Oh, in fact, sorry, Saffron, have you actually got anything decent to shill? Sorry, I should have said.
No, just subscribe to Pharaoh's channel.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Hat.
I'm afraid I do for once. Although it's in the near future. So I've decided that I will be putting out some companions, some commentary, some guides to the works of Evola and the works of Nicholas Gomez. Because I just think there's such a general lack of intellectual direction in our circle, and it's not the fault of the average watcher of AA's channel or Pharaoh's channel. I think there is a mistake in which it's almost as if we expect someone to just like buy a copy of Ride the Tiger, read it in one go, and then just get everything perfectly. It's like it, and I think there does need to be some support in that regard. So yes, I will be writing as soon as I can, helpful explanatory guides with opinions and stuff on Evola and on other authors too, to kind of bolster our understanding of based authors. I think it's time we had something like that, and I think it's part of the founding of our own intellectual space. I think, which we need and which we can do. We have many people capable of doing that, and I think it's high time we got down to it.
Wonderful. That sounds like a very exciting project. Okay, I just want to say a final thank you to the audience. I've been loving the comments today. Thank you so much. Really, lots of engagement. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Next time, we haven't decided what the next topic is. I've got a couple of ideas. Alex sent across a few, and then I think we'll start another art series on something. Subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitter, and you can
smash that like button,
smash the description button so you
click the bell.
Yeah, exactly. So and with that, I will say thank you and good night. Good night.